The shelter smelled like burnt coffee and old rain. Delaney sat on the edge of the cot, both hands wrapped around a paper cup. The coffee was cold. It had been cold for an hour, she hadn't noticed. Silas was drawing on a napkin beside her. He drew the same thing every morning. A house, a tree, three little stick figures holding hands. One tall, one small, one in the middle. She never asked him who the middle one was because she already knew. Because his father had been gone for 11 months, and Silas still drew him every single morning like a boy leaving crumbs on a trail, hoping. Mama, can I have the last cracker? Delaney looked down at the plastic sleeve on her lap. 2 saltines left. She'd been saving them for herself, for tonight. Because the shelter served dinner at 4, and by 9, her stomach would start to fold in on itself. She handed him both. Save one for later, honey. Okay. I didn't save one. He ate them both. Slow, careful, the way he ate everything now. Like every bite was a small miracle he had to be grateful for. She looked away, because she couldn't look at that. Not this morning, not before coffee, not before the world had officially started. Silas leaned his head against her arm, and she felt it. That weight, small, warm, trusting. The weight that had kept her alive when nothing else could. She kissed the top of his hair. I love you, Bug. Love you more, Mama. Impossible, he giggled, which was rare, which made her chest ache, because in a place like this, laughter was expensive. The letter came at 9:14 a.m. Delaney was folding the same 3 shirts she'd been folding for 2 months, placing them into a garbage bag. Because she didn't own a suitcase anymore. Because suitcases required an apartment, and apartments required money. The caseworker walked over. Her name was Doreen. She had orange hair and reading glasses on a chain, and she carried a manila envelope like it might explode. Delaney Whitcomb. Yes. This came for you. Delaney frowned. For me. Certified. Signed for. Yesterday. She wiped her hands on her jeans, which was a habit, from back when her hands had been dry from waitressing shifts, back when she still had a job, back when she still had walls. She took the envelope. It was thick, old feeling, the kind of paper that made you think of law offices with brown leather chairs. She hadn't held a letter like this in years. Open it, Doreen said. You need to open it. It's probably a debt thing. It's not a debt thing. How do you know? Because it's from an estate. Delaney stared at her. A what? Doreen tapped the return address, softly, like she was afraid of scaring it away. Read it, honey. The office chairs at the shelter were plastic, the kind that stuck to your legs in summer and froze your thighs in winter. Delaney sat in one now, Silas on her lap, the envelope on the folding table in front of her. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling, because she had been running for so long that stillness felt dangerous. She tore the seal, slid the papers out, and began to read. To Miss Delaney Marie Whitcomb. You are the sole surviving beneficiary of the estate of Elias John Whitcomb, deceased. In accordance with the terms of the trust established, November 4th, 1948, the enclosed deed and instructions are hereby transferred to you. Property 1 cabin, 2 acres of surrounding land, located at the terminus of Old Whitcomb Trail, Pine Hollow Township, Green Mountains, Vermont. Note the property has remained under legal seal since November of 1948. Access is authorized only to a direct blood heir of the trust holder. You are the only known living qualifying heir. She read it again and again, because the words wouldn't sit still. Elias John Whitcomb, her great-grandfather. She didn't remember him. Nobody in her family talked about him. There had been one photograph in her mother's box of keepsakes, a black and white square, a man standing in front of trees, tall, thin, a quiet-looking face. Her mother had said one thing about him, only one. Grandpa Elias was the kindest man I never got to know. Delaney had been 8 years old when she asked what that meant. Her mother had cried instead of answering, and Delaney had never asked again. She read the rest of the papers 3 times, sealed since 1948, 78 years. She did the math without meaning to. 78 years was longer than her grandmother had lived, longer than any building on her old street had stood, longer than the whole of the modern world she moved through. Somebody had locked something up in 1948 and left the key for her. For her, 25 years old, living in a homeless shelter, $240 to her name. She felt something rise in her chest, small at first, careful. Hope, which was a terrifying feeling, because Hope had betrayed her before. Hope had told her the marriage would work. Hope had told her the second job would be enough. Hope had told her the eviction notice was a mistake. Hope was a liar. And yet, she folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, held it against her heart. Silas. Yeah, Mama. How do you feel about mountains? He looked up at her with eyes far too old for 5 years old. Are we going somewhere? Maybe. Together. Always together, Bug. That's the whole point. He nodded once, very seriously, and went back to his napkin drawing, except this time he added something new. A four-stick figure, standing off to the side, watching. She didn't ask him who it was, because a small part of her was afraid to hear the answer. That night, Delaney lay on the cot with Silas curled against her side. He was asleep. His breath came slow and even, the way it always did when he finally let go of the day. Above them, the shelter ceiling was cracked. She'd counted the cracks so many times she knew them by heart. 12 running east to west, 6 branching off, one that looked like a river. She stared at the river crack, and she thought about her mother. Her mother had raised her alone too. Different circumstances, different heartbreak, but the same shape. Delaney remembered her mother sitting at the kitchen table late at night. Rent notices spread out like tarot cards, a cup of cheap tea going cold beside her. Her mother had died when Delaney was 18. Cancer. Fast. Cruel. The last thing she'd whispered was, "Baby, there are things I never told you." Delaney had waited for more. There hadn't been more. Her mother had closed her eyes and let go, and the sentence had been left there. Hanging. Open, unfinished, a door left cracked. Now staring at the river-shaped crack on the shelter ceiling, Delaney wondered. Wondered if a sealed cabin in Vermont was what her mother had meant. Wondered if this was the door. Wondered if it was finally her turn to open it. She sold 2 things the next morning. Her wedding ring, which she had kept only because it was gold, because she thought maybe one day if she got desperate enough, she could turn it into a bus ticket. Well, she was desperate enough. The pawn shop gave her $62. The second thing she sold was harder. Her mother's silver bracelet, small, thin, engraved on the inside with 2 initials, E.W. Delaney had always assumed those were her mother's initials backwards. She had never thought about the W. She thought about it now. E for Elias, W for Whitcomb. Her great-grandfather had given her mother this bracelet. Her mother had worn it every day. And now Delaney was going to trade it for a bus fare into the mountains her grandfather had disappeared into. The universe had a strange sense of symmetry. The pawn shop gave her $48 for the bracelet. Total, $110, which she spent quickly. 2 bus tickets, 2 thrift store backpacks, a small sleeve of graham crackers, a thermos of hot water, and an extra pair of wool socks for Silas. By the time she was done, she had exactly $42 left. $42 between her and the whole rest of the world. Not enough for a hotel, not enough for a return ticket, not enough for a plan B, which was fine because for the first time in a year, Delaney didn't want a plan B. She wanted a plan A that actually meant something. The morning they left, a woman she'd never spoken to before pressed something into her hand. It was a woman named Ruth, 60-something, gray hair pulled back with a pencil. Delaney had seen her in the shelter chapel every Sunday. Sitting in the same corner, head bowed. They had never exchanged a single word. But that morning, as Delaney was carrying Silas toward the door, Ruth stepped in front of her, held out her hand. In it was a small book, a Bible, leather, worn, the pages soft as fabric from being read too many times. "Take it," Ruth said. "Oh, I couldn't. You're going to the mountains, and the mountains get cold at night. Books keep you warm." Delaney blinked at her. "How did you—" "Doreen has a mouth on her. Take it, honey." Delaney took it. Ruth's hand lingered on hers. "You listen to me now. Wherever you're going, whatever you find, you remember one thing." "Yes, ma'am." "You are not a woman who was thrown away." Delaney's throat closed. "You are a woman who was sent for." And then Ruth turned, walked back to her corner, sat down, bowed her head, as if the conversation had never happened. Delaney stood in the middle of the shelter with the Bible clutched to her chest. And Silas, small and still against her hip, whispered, "Mama, Why are you crying? She kissed his forehead. Because I forgot, she said. Forgot what? That people are kind. The bus left at 6:17 a.m. The city faded fast. Behind them, the concrete pulled back. The billboards thinned out. The gas stations grew farther apart. And then one by one, the trees began to close in. Silas pressed his face against the window. Mama, look. I see bug. There's so many. So many what? Trees, it's like a whole ocean, except green. She smiled and put her arm around him and held him close as the miles unspooled. The bus climbed and climbed. The engine strained on the switchbacks. Passengers thinned out. By the third stop, only 6 people remained. By the fifth stop, 3. By the last stop, only 2, Delaney and Silas. The driver looked back over his shoulder as they gathered their bags. Sure, this is where you meant to get off. Yes, sir. Ain't nothing out here. There's something, she said. Just a little further. He shrugged. Suit yourself, ma'am. Buses come back through on Wednesdays, if you change your mind. Thank you. Cabin lady, he added. She turned around. Excuse me. He was looking at her strange now, squinting, like he was seeing something behind her. You look like her, he said. The old cabin lady, from up the trail. Never met her myself, just heard stories. What stories? He shook his head slowly. Nothing good, ma'am. Nothing good. The bus doors folded shut. The engine coughed. And the bus rolled away, leaving Delaney and Silas standing on a strip of gravel in the middle of nowhere. The quiet came down like a curtain. She listened. No cars, no voices, no hum of anything human at all. Only wind, only birds, only the small sound of her own breath. Silas slipped his small hand into hers. Mama. Yes, Bug. Is the cabin scary? She looked up the mountain, at the trail winding into the trees. Impossibly narrow, impossibly steep, impossibly waiting. I don't know yet, sweetheart. Are we going anyway? She squeezed his hand. Yes, we are. The walk took 2 hours. The trail wasn't really a trail anymore. It was a suggestion, a memory of a trail. The forest had swallowed most of it. Roots buckled the ground. Ferns leaned across the path like curtains. Twice she lost her footing and had to catch herself against a tree. Silas walked in front of her. Sometimes she carried him. He wasn't a heavy child. He was small for 5. Undersized, which she blamed on herself. On the missed meals, on the year that had wrung the softness out of both of them. But he was strong in a way that made her chest ache. He didn't complain. Not once. He said things like, Mama, I see a bird, and Mama, the air smells like Christmas, and Mama, is that a real waterfall? I was doing what children do when they don't want their mothers to be sad. He was pretending everything was an adventure. She played along, because if he could pretend, she could pretend too. The trees opened. She didn't notice at first, because she was watching her feet, because the ground was uneven, because she was afraid of twisting her ankle a mile from anywhere. Then Silas stopped, just stopped, frozen, his small body still, his face tilted upward. Mama. What is it? He raised his little finger and pointed. She looked up, and there it was, the cabin, sitting alone in a clearing at the edge of a wide, silent slope. The kind of clearing that looked like it had waited 100 years to be discovered. The kind of quiet that made your bones feel loud. It was smaller than she'd pictured. Wood, dark, weathered by decades of Vermont winters. The windows were boarded up with planks so old they had greened at the edges. The chimney leaned slightly to the left. A stone step led to the front door, and on the door, right in the center of it, was the seal, metal, rusted, bolted through the wood in 4 places, a round plate the size of a dinner plate, and stamped across the middle, faded but still legible. Property closed by order of the county, November 1948. Delaney's breath caught. Silas's small hand tightened around hers. Mama. I know Bug. It looks sad. She swallowed. It looks like it's been waiting. For what? She didn't answer, because she was afraid the answer was us. She walked around the cabin first. Once. Slow. Carefully. The windows were intact behind the boards. She could see the outlines, small square panes, original glass. Nobody had broken in. Nobody had tried. The roof was old but whole. The wood had darkened but not rotted. Somebody had built this place to last. Somebody had chosen every board, every nail. There were no footprints in the moss around the foundation. No cigarette butts, no beer cans, no signs of hunters or teenagers or anyone at all. Just moss and ferns and the long, slow patience of decades. She came back around to the front. Silas was sitting on the stone step, holding Mr. Buttons. Mr. Buttons was a small, brown teddy bear, one eye missing, the stuffing coming out of his left paw. Silas had carried him through 3 shelters in 11 months and never once let him go. He looked up as she approached. "Are you going to open it?" "Yes." "Are you scared?" She knelt down in front of him, cupped his small face in her hands, and made her voice as steady as she could. "A little bit, honey, but scared is okay. Scared just means something matters." He nodded, very seriously. "Then open it, Mama." She kissed his forehead, stood up, turned to the door. The bolts had rusted into the wood. She'd brought a small crescent wrench from the shelter's maintenance closet. Doreen had given it to her without asking why. Some questions were kinder unasked. The first bolt was the worst. It squealed like it was in pain. Her arms burned. Sweat gathered at the small of her back even though the mountain air was cold. She had to brace her feet against the stone step and pull with her whole body. The bolt came free, fell to the ground with a soft, heavy sound. She stared at it, because something in her had believed this door would never open. She kept going, second bolt, third, fourth, each one loosened a little easier than the one before, as if the cabin was letting her in, as if it had been waiting to be released. When the last bolt fell, she lowered the metal seal into her hands. It was heavier than it looked. Cold, dented in one corner. She turned it over slowly. On the back, someone had scratched something into the metal a long time ago. Faint, nearly worn away. 2 words, for her. Delaney's throat tightened. For her. Not for a stranger, not for a lawyer, not for a bank. For her, whoever her was, whoever had been coming. She set the seal down on the stone step, reverently, the way you might set down a wedding ring. Then she turned to face the door. She placed her hand on the wood. The door was solid oak. Somebody had made this door out of a full tree. Somebody had planed it, sanded it, fitted it to the frame with a care she hadn't seen in 100 years of buildings. Silas came and stood behind her, his small hand pressed against the back of her thigh. "Mama." "I know, Bug." "Wait," she turned. "What is it?" "Should we say something first?" She blinked at him. "Say what?" I thought for a long moment, his little face scrunched up, focused, serious. "Like when Ruth said the prayer before we ate," he said, "in the shelter. Should we say something before we go in?" Delaney's chest went tight. Because he was right. Because a door that had been sealed for 78 years deserved more than a shove. She knelt down beside her son, put her arm around him, and whispered softly into the small space between them and the door. "We come in peace. We come to remember. Whoever you were, whatever you protected, thank you. We're here now." Silas whispered too. "Amen." Delaney smiled through the tears she hadn't known were coming. "Amen, Bug." She stood, wrapped her fingers around the iron handle, and pushed. The door groaned, slow, heavy, the way things groan when they haven't spoken in decades. A rush of air spilled out. Cool, dry, not the sour smell of rot she'd expected. Not mildew, not decay. Something older. Cedar, dust, and the faintest ghost of pine sap long since dried into the walls. The door swung open wider, and afternoon light poured into the room ahead of her. Motes of dust rose in the golden shaft, turning, turning, like the room was breathing for the first time in a lifetime. Delaney stepped inside. The floorboards took her weight without complaint. She looked around, and her breath left her body. The cabin was not empty. It was not ransacked. It was not collapsed. It was not the ruin she had been bracing herself for. It was a home, just a home, held perfectly still, in a moment, frozen in October of 1948. There was a wooden table in the center of the room, 2 chairs pushed in tidily on either side, a small vase in the middle holding the dried skeletal remains of what had once been wildflowers. A calendar hung on the wall by the window. She could see the page from where she stood. October 1948. The days ticked off in careful pencil marks up until the 14th. And then, nothing. A coat hung by the door, a man's wool coat, dark green, threadbare at the elbows. A pair of leather work boots stood beneath it, neatly aligned, their laces coiled inside them. A small cast-iron stove sat in the far corner, its door hanging open. Inside, gray ash. Old ash. Ash that had been cold for 3/4 of a century. Above the stove on a shelf, a row of glass jars. Preserves. Their contents darkened to a deep amber. The labels handwritten in a careful looping script. Blueberries, rhubarb, pears, September 1948. A rocking chair set by the boarded window. And on the seat of the rocking chair, folded with impossible care, was a knitted afghan. Not the mess of an abandonment, the neatness of a man who intended to come back. Silas whispered behind her. Mama, it looks like someone lives here. I know Bug. Where did they go? She couldn't answer, because she didn't know. She moved deeper into the room. Slow, reverent, as if she were walking through a church. The walls were paneled in dark cedar. Photographs hung on the western wall in a row. Small black and white squares in wooden frames. Stepped closer, her heart began to beat harder. The first photograph was of a young man standing in front of a truck. Tall, thin, dark hair combed back. She recognized him instantly. She had only seen one picture of him in her life, but she knew that face the way you know your own hands. Elias Whitcomb, her great-grandfather. The second photograph was of the same man, older, standing in front of the cabin itself, just the way it looked now, but new. The wood pale, the seal not yet on the door. The third photograph was of a woman. Delaney inhaled sharply, because the woman in the photograph looked like her. Not exactly, but close enough that it made her stomach turn over. The same jaw, the same shape of eye, the same tilt of the head. She reached out, ran a fingertip across the glass. Her great-grandmother. She had to be. The woman she had never even known existed. Silas came up beside her. Mama, she looks like you. I know Bug. Is that our grandma? Great-great-grandma. He counted the greats on his fingers. That's a lot of great. She laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh. It came out choked and wet. Yeah, she said, it is. She turned toward the table. That was when she saw it. Something on the wood. Small, folded, white against the dark grain of the tabletop. She had missed it in her first sweep of the room because she had been staring at the calendar, at the coat, at the boots. But there it was, a piece of cloth, folded into a perfect square, sitting on the table beside a single blue teacup. She moved toward it slowly, almost afraid, because everything in this cabin was 78 years old and holy. Every object here had been placed by hands that were long since dust. She felt like she was stepping into someone else's prayer. She stopped at the table. She looked down. The cloth was a handkerchief, white cotton, yellowed at the edges, and embroidered in the corner in careful looping thread was a name. She stared at it. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were reading. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked the handkerchief up, held it in the light of the open doorway. Read the embroidered letters once, twice, 3 times. Margaret Rose. Delaney's knees went soft, because Margaret Rose was her mother's name. Her mother, who had been born in November of 1946, which meant, on the day this cabin was sealed. On the day Elias Whitcomb walked out this door and did not come back. His granddaughter Margaret Rose was 2 years old, and he had left a handkerchief on the table, embroidered with her name, waiting to be sent. He had been planning to send it to her for her 2nd birthday. He had never gotten the chance. Delaney sank down onto one of the chairs, the one that had been waiting for her empty for 78 years. She pressed the handkerchief to her mouth, and she wept, because her mother had died at 41 without ever knowing that somewhere in the mountains of Vermont there had been a man who had embroidered her name on a piece of cloth, had folded it neat, had set it on a table, had meant to send it, had loved her from a distance she never knew existed, and now Delaney was holding it, 78 years late, on behalf of a woman who was no longer alive to receive it. Silas climbed up into her lap. He didn't ask why she was crying. He just wrapped his little arms around her neck. and held her the way she had held him 1,000 times. "It's okay, Mama." "Silas, it's okay. Whoever this was, he was nice. I can tell." She squeezed him against her chest. "How can you tell, Bug?" He looked up, very seriously, his small hand pressed to her wet cheek. "Because the house feels like you." She could not speak, because the truth of what he had just said was too large for her lungs. She sat there a long time, long enough that the light shifted across the floor, long enough for the golden shaft from the door to move from the table to the wall, long enough for the afternoon to begin turning toward evening. She thought she should stand up. She thought she should look around more, explore, search the drawers, look at the shelves, understand what she'd walked into, but she couldn't move, because a strange feeling had settled over her, a feeling she hadn't had since childhood, the feeling of being known, for the first time in a year, for the first time since her mother died. Delaney did not feel alone. Something about this cabin, something about the folded coat and the boots and the handkerchief and the row of photographs. She was surrounded by proof that she came from someone, that she belonged to a line, that before her mother and before her grandmother, there had been a man in a wool coat who had loved his family enough to embroider their names on cloth. She lifted Silas from her lap, set him gently on the floor, stood, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, and went to explore the rest of her inheritance. There was a small bedroom off the main room. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and found a narrow bed made up neatly with a quilted blanket, a nightstand with a kerosene lamp, a small braided rug on the floor, a hook on the wall with another coat hanging on it, a woman's coat this time, dark blue, worn thin at the collar. She stared at the coat, her great-grandmother's maybe, or maybe not. There was no way to know. On the nightstand was a photograph in a small frame. She picked it up. The glass was clean somehow. She wiped it once with her sleeve and looked at the image. It was her great-grandfather, standing in front of the cabin, beside another man, two men, shoulder to shoulder. Both of them laughing, both of them young, both of them squinting into the sun. She frowned, because the other man's face was familiar too, in a way she couldn't place, in a way that plucked at something. Some memory, some article she'd read, some name she'd heard. She turned the photograph over. On the back in ink that had faded to a soft rust color was a single line, "My brother in all but blood, summer 1946. She stared at it, because in 1946 her great-grandfather had a brother he wasn't related to, a friend he loved that much, a friend he trusted enough to photograph. And then in October of 1948, something had happened. And her great-grandfather had never come back to this cabin. She looked at the second man's face again, trying to place him, trying to remember where she'd seen that face before. She would remember later. She would remember with a jolt that would knock the wind from her. But not yet, not now. Now she just placed the frame back on the nightstand, face down, as if the second man in the picture had somehow been listening. As if by turning him face down, she could give her great-grandfather a moment of privacy. She left the bedroom, closed the door softly, and went to find Silas. I was in the main room kneeling by the little cast-iron stove. He had Mr. Buttons in one hand. He was carefully placing a small stick from the wood box into the empty firebox. "Bug, what are you doing?" He looked up. "We're going to sleep here, right?" "I don't know yet, honey. But if we sleep here, it's going to be cold." Her chest ached, because he was 5 years old, and he was already thinking about her. She walked over, sat down beside him on the floor, put her arm around him. "Yeah, Bug, we might sleep here. Then I have to make a fire. I'll do the fire, sweetheart. You just sit with me." He nodded, leaned into her. She could feel his small body still humming with all the walking they'd done, all the hours, all the strangeness. He was tired. She was tired too. She looked out the open door, at the deepening blue of the evening, at the long shadows of the trees, at the mountain rolling away in every direction like a green ocean. She felt small. She felt young. She felt scared. And then she felt something else too, something quieter, steadier, something that had been growing in her ever since she picked up that handkerchief. She felt placed. For the first time in a year, maybe the first time in her whole life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She built the fire. She had watched her mother build fires in the little potbelly stove of the last apartment they had shared when Delaney was small. Her hands remembered. The dry kindling caught fast. She fed it slowly, careful, coaxing, until a small orange flame began to bloom in the cold black belly of the stove. Silas watched with wide eyes. Mama, it's like magic. It's just firebug. Fire is magic, she smiled. You're right, it is. She closed the stove door, left the flue open, watched the little glow grow steadier through the mica window. The cabin began to warm. She unrolled her sleeping bag on the floor beside the stove, spread it out. Silas immediately curled up on it, pulling Mr. Buttons close. Mama, come lie down. In a minute, Bug. Let me check the door first. She walked to the front door, looked out. The evening had settled into a deep purple blue. The clearing was still. She could not see the trail anymore. The forest had swallowed it in the low light. She closed the door, slid the old wooden bolt across. It moved. It worked. It clicked home. She rested her forehead against the wood for a long moment and whispered so quietly no one could have heard. Thank you. She wasn't sure who she was thanking. Her great-grandfather, her mother, the universe. Ruth from the shelter. The bus driver who called her cabin lady. Some part of all of them, maybe. She turned around and walked back to Silas, laid down beside him, pulled the edge of the sleeping bag over both of them, wrapped him in her arms. He was already half asleep. Mama. Yeah, Bug. Can we stay up for tonight? Yes. For always, she kissed his hair. We'll see. I like it here. I know you do, honey. It feels like it likes us back. Her throat closed. She did not answer. She just held him. And in the flickering orange light of the stove, on the floor of a cabin that had been sealed for 78 years, Delaney Whitcomb closed her eyes. She thought she would lie awake all night. She was wrong. For the first time since her marriage had ended, for the first time since she had lost her apartment, for the first time since the shelter and the costs and the plastic bags and the 10,000 hours of pretending she was not afraid. Delaney Whitcomb fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She did not hear the truck. She did not hear the tires on the gravel a quarter-mile down the mountain. She did not hear the two men stepping out into the last purple light of the evening, standing beside their vehicle looking up toward the cabin. She did not hear the older one say quietly to the younger, "So, somebody finally opened it." She did not hear the younger one reply, "You always said this day would come." She did not hear the older one grunt, "I was hoping I'd be dead first." The two men stood there a long time, watching the thin thread of smoke rise from the chimney into the deepening blue. Then they got back in the truck, and they drove away. For now. She woke before the sun. The stove had gone cool. Not cold, just the last patient warmth of a fire that had done its job through the night. Silas was still curled against her side, his breath slow and even. Mr. Buttons tucked under his chin. Delaney did not move for a long time, because she was afraid the cabin would disappear, because part of her had spent the whole night waiting to wake up back on the shelter cot. But the cabin did not disappear. The rough beams held above her head. The dark cedar walls held around her. And when she turned her face into her pillow, she smelled pine sap and old wool and the faintest whisper of wood smoke. She was still here. She had actually made it here. She slid out from under the sleeping bag as gently as she could, tucked the edge back around Silas, watched him for a moment, his long dark lashes, his small parted mouth, the pink flush of sleep in his cheeks. He looked like a boy who had never known a shelter. He looked like a boy who belonged in this cabin. She wanted so badly for that to be true. She rose, wrapped Ruth's Bible against her chest for warmth, and went to the window to look at the morning. Frost had gathered on the porch boards overnight. The clearing outside had turned silver. The tips of the grass, the edges of the leaves, even the top of the woodpile, everything glittered soft in the pale early light. Beyond the clearing, the mountain unfolded in every direction, gray and green and endless. A blue mist sat low in the valley below like the mountain was breathing. And it was so quiet, so terribly, wonderfully quiet. Delaney pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She had forgotten what silence sounded like. Real silence. Not the buzz of a fluorescent tube, not the hum of a vending machine down the hall, not the low mumble of 40 strangers trying to sleep in the same room. Just Silence. She let it settle into her ribs, let it press against the tight place under her collarbone that had been clenched for a year, and she breathed, slow, deep, once, twice, 3 times. Then she turned back to the cabin, because the cabin was calling her, because there were things here she hadn't found yet. And a small voice in the back of her mind, a voice she couldn't ignore, was whispering the same 3 words over and over. Look at everything. Look at everything. Look at everything. She started with the bookshelf. It was tucked into the corner beside the stove. Small, 3 shelves, old books packed tight together. She ran her fingertip along the spines. Faded titles. A History of Vermont Timber. The Farmer's Almanac, 1946. The Book of Common Prayer. Ordinary. Careful. The Library of a Man Who Read at Night by Kerosene Light. Except one book was different. The very last book on the very bottom shelf. Its spine was blank. Not faded, not worn, just blank, as if it had never been titled at all. Delaney knelt down, pulled it free. It was heavier than a book that size should be, because it wasn't a book. It was a journal, a leather-bound notebook, its edges tied shut with a leather cord. Her heart began to pound in a way she had not felt in a year. She carried it to the table, set it down, slid into the same chair she had wept in yesterday, and with hands that would not stop trembling, she untied the cord. The pages opened easy. The handwriting was neat, careful, a little slanted. The ink had faded to a soft brown, and the first entry was dated, January 3rd, 1948. She read, "The winter has been long, but the land is good. C came by today. He talks now about opportunities, about growth. He says a man with land like ours should not sit on it. He says there are men in Boston who would pay well for what we have." I told him I would think about it, but I did not tell him what I really thought, which is that no amount of money in Boston is worth a single one of these trees. Delaney's breath caught. C, just C. She turned the page. March 11th, 1948. C brought papers again. "He wants to be my partner. He says we can develop the land together. Half and half. Brothers to the end." I do not know what to say. I love him like a brother. I have loved him like a brother since we were boys. But something is wrong. He does not look at me when he speaks anymore. He looks at the mountain behind me, like he is measuring it. She turned another page. Faster now. July 2nd, 1948. Is in trouble. He came here last night. His hands were shaking. He owes money to men who do not forgive debts. He asked me to sign the north acreage over to him, just as collateral, just for a season, just until he can settle up. I have known him since we were 7 years old. I put the papers in a drawer. I told him I would sleep on it. July 3rd, I signed. God help me, I signed. Delaney lowered the journal, because a coldness had started at the base of her spine and was climbing, because she already knew where the story was going, because she had heard it before, in 100 variations, in 100 women's lives, the story of someone who was trusted, the story of what happens when you love the wrong person. She turned the page. The entries got shorter after that. August 4th, sent a lawyer. There are new papers to sign. Says the arrangement needs to be formalized. I do not like the lawyer. His eyes do not stay in one place. September 10th, something is not right. The papers say more than we agreed to. They say I am transferring all of it, not just the north acreage, all of it. I refuse to sign the final page. C got angry. He has never been angry with me before. September 2nd, I have written to my granddaughter. She will be 2 next month. I embroidered her name on a handkerchief. When she is older, she will understand. Delaney closed her eyes, because that was the handkerchief, because she had held it yesterday, because it had been sitting on this table, waiting for a 2-year-old who was now dead. She opened her eyes and read on. October 8th, I have written a will. I have put things where they must be found. If something happens to me, which I am afraid it will, then someone in my family will one day come here, and they will find what I have left. The truth is heavy. I hope she can carry it. He had written, 78 years ago, her great-grandfather had known. He had known a woman would come. He hadn't known her name. He hadn't known her face. He hadn't known she would be 25 and homeless and holding a 5-year-old boy. But he had known she would come. Delaney's hands would not stop shaking. She turned to the last page of the journal. The final entry was short, October 14th, 1948. C came back today. He was not alone. He brought two men I have never seen before. He would not look at me. There is a wire recording in the shed, a key beneath the third fireplace stone, and a message with the pastor at the little church down in the town. Trust no one who tells you not to look. Trust no one who tells you it is finished. Trust no one who benefits from your silence. She will come. She will come. And when she does, she will know what to do. There was nothing after that. The rest of the journal was blank. Delaney sat still for a long time. The morning had brightened. The frost outside had begun to melt. Somewhere a bird called. Silas made a small sleepy sound and rolled over on the sleeping bag. And Delaney did not move. Because a 5-year-old boy was sleeping 10 feet away. Because he was the only living thing that belonged to her. Because whoever had done this to her great-grandfather, whatever family it was, whatever legacy of greed had begun in this cabin in 1948, it had not ended. It could not have ended, or the cabin would not have been sealed for 78 years. Or her mother would not have died at 41 without a father to bury her. Or Delaney would not be sitting in this chair right now, reading a journal that ended mid-sentence. She looked at the words again, a key beneath the third fireplace stone. She stood up. The stones of the fireplace were rounded river rocks, mortared in decades ago, blackened at the edges from a lifetime of fires. She counted them from the bottom. 1, 2, 3. She pressed her hand against the third stone, and it moved, not much, a wobble, a tremor, something loose beneath the mortar. She worked her fingers around the edges. The mortar was old, crumbling. It flaked away as she scraped it with her thumbnail. She worked at it for 10 minutes. 20. Her fingertips began to bleed. She didn't stop. She could not stop. Because whatever was behind that stone was the reason her great-grandfather had died. The stone came loose in her hands. She lowered it gently to the floor, and she reached inside the cavity behind it. Her fingers found paper, wrapped in oilcloth, bundled with twine, cold, preserved, untouched by 78 years of Vermont winters and Vermont springs. She pulled the bundle out, sat down on the hearth, untied the twine. The papers were in 3 parts. The first was a stack of land deeds, original, handwritten, signed and stamped and sealed with dark wax that had gone brittle with age. She scanned them. Her eyes couldn't focus. Numbers, acreage, township lines, coordinates, but she saw enough to understand. Elias Whitcomb had owned 412 acres of the Green Mountains, not 2, not the little parcel around the cabin, but 412, stretching from the ridge on the west to the river on the east, including everything in between. Everything that a ski resort might sit on, everything that a hotel complex might sit on, everything that a small mountain village of luxury condominiums might sit on. Delaney's mouth went dry. The second bundle was the transfer contract. She unfolded it carefully. It was a long document, 10 pages, notarized, witnessed, every page marked with Elias Whitcomb's careful signature at the bottom. Except the last page. The last page was blank at the signature line, never signed. The transfer had never been legally completed. Which meant. Delaney set the papers down in her lap because her hands would not hold them anymore. Which meant the 412 acres. Legally, officially, under the laws of Vermont, still belonged to the estate of Elias Whitcomb, which was now her. She was a homeless 25-year-old mother, and on paper, she owned a mountain. The third thing in the bundle was a photograph. She almost missed it. It had fallen out of the oilcloth when she untied the twine, tucked under her leg. She only noticed it when she shifted her weight and something crinkled. She picked it up, turned it over. 2 men, standing shoulder to shoulder, the same 2 men from the framed photograph in the bedroom. But this was a different day, a different summer. They were older, maybe 40, both of them tanned, both of them squinting at the camera, both of them smiling. Her great-grandfather and the other one. She looked at his face, long, slow, deliberate, trying to place him, and then it hit her like a slap. Because she had seen that face before. She had seen it just yesterday. In town, on the main street. She hadn't been paying attention. She had been carrying Silas past a row of shop fronts. On her way to the bus station, weeks ago, there had been a statue in the town square, a bronze statue larger than life. A man in a suit, one hand outstretched, one foot slightly forward. The kind of statue towns put up to founders. She had glanced at it, read the name at the base. Cornelius Ashcroft, founder of Pine Hollow, 1902 to 1974. She hadn't thought about it. She had walked past. Now she looked at the second man in her great-grandfather's photograph, Cornelius Ashcroft, her great-grandfather's brother in all but blood, her great-grandfather's murderer. Delaney turned the photograph over. On the back, in her great-grandfather's careful handwriting, were 4 words. I loved him once. Silas woke up. He sat up slowly on the sleeping bag, rubbed his eyes, yawned, and blinked at her with the innocent confusion of a small child in an unfamiliar room. Mama, she wiped her cheeks fast, slid the photograph under the papers. Good morning, Bug. Where are we? You don't remember. He looked around, his face lit up. Oh, the house. That's right. Did you sleep good? Very good. Me too. He crawled off the sleeping bag, walked over on his sock feet, climbed up onto the chair beside her. His hair was sticking up on one side. He was still holding Mr. Buttons. He looked at the papers in her lap. What's that grown-up stuff, honey? Boring, she smiled at him. Very boring. Okay. He accepted this the way he accepted most things, and leaned his small, warm cheek against her arm. She kissed the top of his head. Because she knew. Because in her lap wrapped in oilcloth was the reason 2 men had driven up a mountain last night to see if the cabin's smoke was rising. Because those men were coming back. Because they were coming back today. She had a 5-year-old boy to protect. She had to hide these papers. Now, she thought fast. Because she had learned in the last year that survival was mostly about thinking fast, she stood up, walked to Silas's little thrift store backpack, the one she had bought for him at the shelter. It was blue, faded. It had a small cartoon dinosaur stitched to the side. Silas had loved it the moment she pulled it off the shelf. She unzipped the main pocket. She took the deeds, the contract, the photograph. She wrapped them again in the oilcloth, tied the twine, and she slid them into the bottom of the backpack. Then she stuffed his clothes on top, then Mr. Button's little spare sweater, then a coloring book, then the graham crackers. Nobody, she thought, was going to search a 5-year-old's backpack. She hoped so badly. She zipped the pocket shut, set the backpack by the door, and then she turned around. Because Silas was watching her, very quiet, very still. Mama. Yes, Bug. Are we in trouble? She knelt down in front of him, because he had asked a real question, and he deserved a real answer. A little bit, honey, but Mama's going to fix it. How, Tom? By being smarter than the trouble, them. He thought about that. Okay, he said, and that was that. He walked over to the table, picked up his coloring book, sat down cross-legged on the floor, and began to color. Delaney watched him. She wondered how a 5-year-old boy could have that much dignity. She wondered what he was going to be like when he grew up. She wondered what she was going to do to make sure he got the chance. The knock came at 10:47 in the morning. She had been expecting it, which did not make it any less terrifying, because at 10:47 there was the sound of tires, gravel, an engine, doors slamming, and boots crunching up the path to the porch. She had time, enough time to grab Silas, to lift him onto the bed in the small bedroom, to press a finger to her lips, to whisper, Bug, don't come out, no matter what. Not until Mama says. Okay, stay quiet. I will. Good boy. She closed the bedroom door behind her. She walked back to the main room, smoothed down her hair, wiped her hands on her jeans, and stood in the center of the room, facing the door. She did not open it. Not yet. She was waiting to see what they would do. The knock came again. Polite, careful, a man's knuckles against oak. Miss Whitcomb. She did not answer. Miss Whitcomb, we know you're in there. There's smoke in the chimney. She stayed silent. We'd just like to talk with you a moment. Nothing formal. She waited. A pause. Then a second voice. Younger. Smoother. Miss Whitcomb, my name is Vaughn Merritt. I'm an attorney with a firm in town. Ashcroft Ridge Development asked me to come by. I'm here as a courtesy. An attorney, of course they'd sent an attorney. Of course. Delaney took a slow breath. She lifted her chin. She walked to the door, and she opened it. Just enough. Not the whole way. Enough to see them, not enough to let them in. There were two men on the porch. The first was heavy-set, late 50s, dark suit, steel gray hair combed back. His face was doing the smile it had been trained to do. Not his eyes, the rest. The second man was younger, maybe 35. Tall, lean, handsome in a way that made her instantly suspicious. Because handsome men in tailored suits did not usually show up in mountain clearings unless they wanted something. He held a briefcase. He smiled at her. "Miss Whitcomb, thank you for coming to the door. What do you want?" Not a question, a demand. The older man's smile flickered. The younger one recovered fast. "May we come in?" "No." "I understand. Perhaps we could speak on the porch." "You can speak from where you're standing." "Of course." He set his briefcase down. Very slow, very careful, as if he wanted her to see he was harmless. She wasn't fooled. Miss Whitcomb, Ashcroft Ridge Development, has been aware for many years that this property was under seal. When we saw that the seal had been removed, we thought it prudent to reach out. As a courtesy, nothing more. "How did you know the seal was removed?" "Excuse me. This cabin is 2 hours from anywhere. Nobody knew I was here. I opened that seal yesterday afternoon." "How did you know?" The older man looked at the younger one. The younger one kept smiling. "We monitor properties of interest." "You monitor?" "For safety concerns." For 78 years, his smile got thinner. "Miss Whitcomb, we understand this is a strange situation. We only want to make it easier. Ashcroft Ridge has an existing land agreement with your family's estate. We'd like to offer you a very generous settlement to allow us to complete some paperwork that was left unfinished many decades ago." There it was, the word she had been waiting for. Unfinished. She almost laughed. She did not. Instead, she looked at Von Merritt, slow, steady, and in her calmest voice she said, "Send it through my lawyer." "Miss Whitcomb, I am a lawyer." "Not mine." His smile faltered. "You don't have a lawyer." "I do now." "May I ask who?" "You may not." There was a silence. The older man cleared his throat. "Miss Whitcomb, please understand, these mountains can be unpredictable, especially with a small child. Roads flood, bears wake early some years, fires start unexpectedly." Delaney's blood turned to ice. She kept her voice flat. "Get off of my porch." Von Merritt raised both hands. "Miss Whitcomb, please. That's not what we— Get off my porch." The older man's smile finally dropped completely. He looked at Merritt, nodded once. They picked up the briefcase. They walked back to the truck. Delaney stood in the doorway watching, not moving, not blinking, not until the truck's tires had turned around and disappeared down the trail. Not until the sound of its engine had died away entirely. Then she closed the door, slid the bolt, and sank to her knees on the floor. Because her legs would not hold her anymore. She had to go into town. She hated the thought. Everything in her wanted to stay here. Stay behind the bolted door. Stay in the cabin. Keep Silas hidden. But she could not, because she had 412 acres of paper in a 5-year-old's backpack. And she needed to know if they were real. She needed the county records. She needed a witness. And she needed God help her to find someone she could trust. She told Silas to put on his jacket. He didn't ask why. He just did it. He was that kind of child now. She slung his backpack over her own shoulder, because she was not going to let it out of her sight, not for 1 second. They walked down the mountain. The trail was easier going down than up, but her whole body felt heavier. The papers in her son's backpack weighed more than a mountain. Silas held her hand. He did not talk much. Once halfway down, he squeezed her fingers. "Mama." "Yes, Bug." "Is I good about what, honey?" "Being quiet in the bedroom." She stopped walking, knelt down, cupped his face. "You were perfect, baby. You saved us." He nodded solemnly. Then he tugged her hand and started walking again. And Delaney let him lead, because at that moment he was leading her. The town of Pine Hollow sat in a small valley at the foot of the mountain. Population about 2,000, one main street, a hardware store, a post office, a church with a white steeple, a statue in the square of a man in a bronze suit with his hand outstretched to the mountains. Cornelius Ashcroft. Delaney did not look at the statue. She walked past it fast, Silas trotting beside her, and she headed for the sign that read County Records. The clerk was a woman in her 60s, short gray curls, bifocals, a cardigan buttoned to the top. She looked up when Delaney walked in. Her face did something strange when she saw her. It went pale, just for a second, then it fixed itself. "May I help you, dear? I need to look at a property record." "Which property?" 412 acres. Old Whitcomb Trail. The clerk's hand paused above her keyboard. "Whitcomb." "Yes, ma'am." The clerk looked at her a long moment. Then she typed. The screen loaded. She scrolled. She frowned. She scrolled again. She looked up. Her face was very careful now. "Ma'am, are you a relative of Elias John Whitcomb, great-granddaughter?" The clerk exhaled a very slow breath. "Please sit down, dear." "Why she?" "Please sit down." Delaney sat down. Silas climbed onto her lap. The clerk closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were shining. "That property," as she said, "has been the ghost of this county for 78 years. "What do you mean?" "I mean the paperwork isn't finished, dear. It never was. I've been the county clerk for 31 years. I know this file by heart. Every clerk before me knew it too. We were told never to speak of it, and we didn't. Because Ashcroft Ridge Development paid every mayor of this town for 3 generations to keep it quiet." Delaney could not speak. The clerk leaned forward. Her voice dropped. "Ma'am, that land is yours. It always was. If somebody offers you money for it, do not sign a thing until you've talked to somebody outside this town. Do you hear me? Not one thing, not one piece of paper. Do not trust the sheriff. Do not trust the mayor. Do not trust the man who runs the bank. And especially, do not trust Vaughn Merritt." Delaney's mouth went dry. "He's already been to see me." The clerk shut her eyes. "Oh, honey." "He offered to help." "Oh, honey." The clerk reached across the counter and took Delaney's hand in both of hers. Her hands were dry, cool, trembling slightly. "You listen to me now. There is a bakery 2 blocks up, called O'Brien's. Go there. Ask for Maggie. Tell her Nora sent you." "Why?" "Because Maggie knew your great-grandfather." Delaney could not breathe. "She's still alive. She's 84, and she's been waiting." The bakery smelled like sugar and butter and the memory of 100 childhoods Delaney had never had. The bell above the door jingled. Behind the counter stood an old woman, small, thin as a bird, white hair pinned back, blue eyes so pale they were almost silver. She looked up when the door chimed. She looked at Delaney. She looked at Silas, and her face crumbled. Just crumbled, like a slow, soft collapse of something that had been holding itself together for too long. She pressed one hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled. She whispered something Delaney could not hear. Then she came around the counter. She came fast, faster than an 84-year-old woman should move. She stopped a foot in front of Delaney, stared up at her face. Her chin trembled. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, "you have his eyes." Delaney could not speak. The old woman turned to Silas, bent down to his height, reached out one shaking hand, cupped his small chin. "And you look just like a little Whitcomb." Silas looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. "You knew my great-great-grandpa," Maggie O'Brien laughed. It came out as half a sob. "Yes, sweetheart, I knew him. When I was your age, he used to give me peppermints from the cart on his kitchen table." Silas smiled a small, delighted smile. "He sounds nice. He was the best man I ever knew." Maggie straightened, took Delaney's hand, pulled her back toward the counter. Come with me, both of you, in the back." "Ma'am, Nora sent you." "How did you—" "Because Nora is the only person in this town who would." Maggie turned, flipped the sign on the door to closed, locked it, pulled the shade down. "Now," she said, "come sit down and I'll make some coffee, and you and we're going to talk." The back of the bakery was warm and smelled of flour. Maggie sat Silas at a small wooden table with a plate of fresh sugar cookies. He looked at them like they were treasure. "Go on, dear," she said. "They're for you." He looked up at Delaney. His eyes asked permission. She nodded. She had to look away, because a plate of sugar cookies for her son had almost broken her. Maggie poured coffee for the two of them, sat down across from Delaney, wrapped her small hands around her mug. She looked at Delaney a long time. Then she said quietly, "He didn't leave you, ma'am. Your great-grandfather, he didn't leave. He didn't run off. Whatever your family was told, whatever anybody said, it was a lie." "I know." Maggie's eyes widened. "You know, I found his journal." The old woman went very still. "Where?" "On the shelf, in the cabin." "Sweet Lord." Maggie's hands were trembling. "He said someday somebody would find it. He told me. When I was 6 years old, he said. He said, Maggie, someday a girl is going to come down this mountain. You take care of her. Do you hear me? You take care of her. Do you promise?" Delaney's throat closed. Maggie reached across the table and took her hand. "I promised him. 69 years ago, and I have been waiting for you ever since." They both cried. Silas ate a cookie and watched them with wide, understanding eyes. He did not ask a single question. Maggie told her about that year, about how her father had been the same age as Elias Whitcomb, about how the two of them had cut timber together as boys, about how Elias had helped feed their family through the terrible winter of 1945, about how Cornelius Ashcroft had come home from the war a changed man, angry, hungry, bitter about the money he did not have, about the family land he had lost to bad decisions before he even inherited it, about how Cornelius had watched Elias Whitcomb inherit 412 acres in 1946 and had never forgiven him for it, about how in October of 1948 Elias Whitcomb had disappeared, about how the sheriff had called it a runaway, about how Maggie's father had come home from the woods one night, boots muddy, face gray, and had sat down at the kitchen table and told his 6-year-old daughter one thing. "Maggie, Elias is dead. Don't you ever tell anyone I told you. Don't you ever forget it either, because someday it's going to matter." Delaney stared at her. "Your father knew." "My father saw the body." "Oh, God." "My father was ordered to help bury it." "Oh, Maggie." "He carried it in his heart for 51 years. It's the reason he drank. It's the reason he died with his mouth full of things he never said. He said only one thing to me at the end, only one thing." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulled out a small brass key, old, green with patina, tied to a small piece of leather cord. She placed it on the table between them. He said, "When she comes, give her this." Delaney stared at the key. "What does it open?" Maggie's eyes were wet and steady. "There is a strong box," she said, "buried under the altar, in the little church up the road. Elias put it there himself, the Sunday before he died. He asked the pastor to hide it, to pass the knowledge down, to wait until someone in his blood came looking. The pastor, Ellis Thorne, he's the son of the man Elias trusted. Ellis is 82 years old now, and he has been waiting for you almost as long as I have." Delaney and Silas walked to the church that afternoon. The steeple sat white against the deep green of the trees. The building itself was small, cedar shingled, a single dirt path winding up to the front doors. Pastor Ellis Thorne was raking leaves outside. He was tall and slightly stooped, thick glasses, a face weathered like river bark. He looked up as she approached. And for the second time that day, an old face crumbled at the sight of her. "You're her," he whispered. She held up the brass key. He looked at her, and nodded once, slowly. "Come inside, child, and bring the little one. The Lord and I have been waiting a long time." The strong box was under the altar, under a loose flagstone, in a small hollowed space that had been dug into the earth beneath the floorboards of the sanctuary. Ellis Thorne pried the stone up with a small crowbar. His hands trembled with the effort. Silas held Delaney's hand tight. The box was small, iron, rusted at the corners, but the lock still worked. The brass key slid in, turned, clicked. The lid rose. Inside were more papers, sealed in oilcloth, and beside them, a single small object, a spool, wrapped in a scrap of red silk. Ellis Thorne closed his eyes. "He put a recording in there," he whispered. "My father told me. He said, Ellis, there is a voice inside that box, a wire recording, the kind they made just after the war. And someday a woman is going to come, and she is going to need to hear it, because the truth of what happened on this mountain will not fit on paper. Some truths only live in a voice." Delaney lifted the small, silk-wrapped object. Inside was a spool of thin steel wire, coiled tight, preserved in oil. The kind of recording device her great-grandfather would have had access to in 1948. A wire recorder, state-of-the-art for its time, kept safe under an altar for 78 years, her great-grandfather. His voice, waiting for her. She did not open it there. She wrapped it back in the silk, set it carefully in the pocket of her coat, nodded to Ellis Thorne, thanked him with a whisper, and she and Silas walked out into the afternoon light, which was already beginning to turn gold. Her phone rang halfway back up the mountain trail. She had a cheap prepaid phone. She had bought it at the pawn shop with 3 of her last dollars. Only 2 people had the number, Doreen from the shelter and Vaughn Merritt. She looked at the screen. Vaughn Merritt. Her stomach dropped. She answered. She did not speak. Vaughn Merritt's voice came through smooth and warm and utterly changed. "Miss Whitcomb." She said nothing. "I saw you go into the bakery today." Her blood ran cold. "I saw you go to the church." She could not breathe. "I saw a lot of things today, Miss Whitcomb, and I have to be honest with you. So did some other people. People who are not as patient as I am." She stopped walking. Silas looked up at her, confused. Vaughn Merritt's voice softened, grew gentler, which was worse. "You have a beautiful little boy, Miss Whitcomb. Don't. Just think about it, please. That's all I'm asking." The line went dead. She lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. Silas was watching her. He smiled at him. She smiled at him because she was his mother and that was her job. And her voice came out steady in a way she did not know she could still do. "Let's go home, Bug. To the cabin. To the cabin." The cabin had been searched. She saw it the moment she opened the door. The journal was gone from where she had left it on the table. The books on the shelf were disordered. The rocking chair had been moved. The rug had been kicked back. The photograph in the bedroom was gone. Someone had been here while she was in town. Someone had come in. Someone who had a key, or had picked the bolt, or had known where the extra hinge came loose. Someone who had wanted the papers. Someone who did not know that the papers were in a 5-year-old's backpack, wrapped in oilcloth, underneath a dinosaur patch, underneath a stuffed teddy bear, underneath a coloring book. Someone who had not thought to search the boy, because who would suspect the boy? Delaney sank down onto the hearth. She held Silas against her chest. She lit the fire in the little iron stove, slow, steady, careful. She built it into a small orange glow, then a proper flame, then a full warm heart of fire. She opened Ruth's Bible. She read to Silas in a soft, low voice about shepherds, about lost sheep, about someone coming down the mountain to find what was theirs. He fell asleep in her lap. She kept reading, not for him anymore, for herself, because she needed the words, because she needed to remember that people had been afraid before her, had been alone before her, had been hunted before her, and had endured. Outside, down the mountain trail, very far away, faint at first, then closer, headlights, 2 of them, bumping up the road toward the cabin. She did not move. She held her son. She held the Bible. She held her breath. And she whispered so quiet that only the fire could have heard her. "Grandpa, please, watch over us tonight." The fire crackled. The headlights kept coming. The headlights stopped a 1/4 mile down the mountain. They did not come closer. Delaney watched them through the small gap in the boarded window. 2 round yellow eyes, sitting in the trees, steady, patient, not blinking, just watching the cabin, just letting her know they were there. She did not move for a long time, because moving felt dangerous, because breathing felt dangerous, because a 5-year-old boy was sleeping in her lap and every instinct she had learned in a year of homelessness was telling her one thing: run. But there was nowhere to run. The trail went 2 ways, up to more mountain, or down toward the headlights. She could not carry Silas into the woods at midnight in October. She could not stay here and wait. She had to think, which was hard, because her heart was pounding so loud she was afraid it would wake him. She looked around the cabin, slow, deliberate, every corner of the room she had known for a day and a half, and her eyes fell on the small silk-wrapped bundle in her coat pocket, the wire recording, her great-grandfather's voice waiting for her since 1948. She did not know if it would help. She did not know if it would matter. But she knew this. She knew that if something happened to her tonight, if those headlights came the rest of the way up the mountain, if those men came through the door, then whatever her great-grandfather had left, whatever he had risked his life to record, would be lost, unless she moved it first. She stood up, slow, careful. So Silas would not wake. She laid him gently on the sleeping bag, tucked Mr. Buttons under his chin. She stared at the door, she stared at the headlights, and she thought about Maggie O'Brien. Maggie's bakery had a back door. Delaney remembered it. The way you remember exits when you have been unsafe your whole life. The bakery sat on the town square, 2 blocks up from the county records office. It closed at 4. It reopened at 5 in the morning for the workers who wanted fresh bread before the drive to the ski resort. If she could get to Maggie, if she could get there before the men on the mountain got to her, then Maggie could hide the recording. Maggie could hide the papers. Maggie could keep Silas safe, but how? How was she going to get down the mountain in the dark with a sleeping child? She looked at the fireplace, she looked at the stove, and she remembered something Ellis Thorne had said, very quietly, in the church that afternoon. So quietly she had almost missed it. There is another way down. There is a footpath behind the cabin, overgrown. Nobody has used it in 50 years. It comes out behind the church. Your great-grandfather knew it. So did my father. Don't forget it. She had almost forgotten it, almost. She put on her coat. She lifted Silas as gently as she could. She wrapped him in the sleeping bag like a small blanket-bundled parcel. He murmured. He did not wake. She slung his backpack over her shoulder. She slipped the wire recording into her inside pocket. She looked at the front door, and she walked past it, into the small bedroom, to the small back window that faced the woods, the one she had noticed her first morning, the one that opened outward with a hidden latch. She unlatched it. The window swung open. Cold October night air rushed in, and Delaney Whitcomb climbed out into the dark, carrying her son, carrying the truth, carrying 78 years of waiting on her back. The footpath was worse than Ellis had said, because it was not a footpath anymore. It was a memory of a footpath. Branches everywhere, roots, moss so thick it slid underfoot. She fell twice. Silas woke on the second fall, small, startled, confused. Mama, shh, bug, Mama's here. It's an adventure. Where are we going? Down to see Maggie. In the dark. Yes. Why? She kissed his forehead. Because we have a secret to tell her, and secrets have to be told at night. He accepted this, because he was 5, because he trusted her, because he had no other choice. He put his little arms around her neck. He pressed his cheek into her collarbone, and he did not cry. Not once. She walked. She walked and she walked and she walked. The mountain was steep. Her thighs burned, her lungs burned, her arms burned from carrying him. But she kept walking, because a woman who has slept on the floor of a shelter for 11 months can walk anywhere. Because a woman who has watched her son eat 2 saltines like they were a feast can carry any weight. Because 78 years ago, a man in a wool coat had folded a handkerchief on a table and hoped somebody would come. She was coming. She was almost there. She got to the church at 4:22 in the morning. The moon had set. The sky was that deep charcoal color that comes before dawn. Every dog in Pine Hollow was still asleep. Maggie's bakery was 2 blocks up. Delaney climbed the last hill with Silas heavy in her arms. She did not stop. She did not slow down. The kitchen light was already on. Of course it was, because Maggie O'Brien had been baking bread at 4:22 in the morning for 60 years. Delaney tapped the glass, softly, because she did not want to startle her. Maggie came to the back door in a flour-dusted apron. She saw Delaney. She saw Silas in her arms. She saw the look on Delaney's face. She did not say a word. She just unlocked the door, opened it wide, and pulled them inside. She locked it behind them, turned off the kitchen light, and in the warm dark that smelled of yeast and butter and safety, Maggie O'Brien held Delaney's face in both of her small, floured hands, and she said very quietly, "You made it, sweet girl. You made it down." Delaney's knees gave out. Maggie caught her, because that was what Maggie O'Brien had been born to do. The wire recording took 3 days to arrange. Maggie had a nephew in Boston, younger than her by 30 years, a journalist at a real newspaper. the kind that still did investigations. Maggie called him on her landline. She told him only this: "I need you to come. Bring your recorder. And every lawyer you know that hates Ashcroft Ridge, which is most of them. Come now." He drove up that afternoon. His name was Rowan Fitch. Tall, silver-bearded. He looked at Delaney the way people who have seen too much of the world look at things they were still capable of being surprised by. He looked at the wire recording. He whistled low. "I know a guy," he said. "Who?" "An audio archivist, Vermont Historical Society. He restores these old wire recordings for museums. He has one of the last working playback machines in New England. He can convert this to a digital file in a few hours." "How much?" Rowan smiled. "Free. For you. Free." "I don't understand." "Miss Whitcomb, there are people in this state who have been waiting for Ashcroft Ridge to fall for a very long time. You may not know that, but we do." Silas was sitting on the counter of the bakery eating a cinnamon roll. Maggie was watching him like he was the sun. Rowan looked at the little bomb. He looked back at Delaney. His face changed. "Miss Whitcomb," he said quieter, "I have to ask you something." "Yes." "Do you want revenge?" She thought about it. She thought about her mother, about her grandmother, about her great-grandfather in a wool coat in an empty cabin. She thought about Silas, about the handkerchief, about the boy in her lap eating cinnamon rolls at a bakery counter for the first time in his short life. She looked at Rowan Fitch. "No," she said. "No, I want the truth to stop being a secret." Rowan Fitch nodded very slowly. "That," he said, "I can help you with." The audio archivist worked overnight. He restored the wire. He cleaned the hiss. He removed the crackle. He gave them a digital file, 22 minutes long. Delaney did not listen to it alone. She listened to it in the back of Maggie's bakery, with Maggie beside her, with Ellis Thorne on the other side, with Rowan Fitch across the table. Silas was upstairs asleep in Maggie's spare bedroom under a quilt that had belonged to Maggie's mother. The archivist pressed play, and a voice she had never heard filled the small, warm room. Her great-grandfather's voice, steady, clear, careful. "My name is Elias John Whitcomb. Today is October 12th, 1948. If you are listening to this recording, then I am no longer alive. I am recording this because I do not believe I will survive the coming week. And there are things I must say." Delaney could not breathe. Maggie held her hand. Elias Whitcomb kept speaking. "Cornelius Ashcroft has been my closest friend since I was 7 years old. I loved him like a brother. I do not now believe he ever loved me the same way. I believe he has always looked at what I have and seen what he does not. I am going to describe what has happened. I am going to name names. I am going to say what I have been asked to, and I am going to say what I have refused. If this recording reaches the right hands, then it will be my testimony from beyond my grave. My name will speak when I cannot." He named the men. He named the dates. He named the amounts. He named the pressure. He named the threats. He described the debts Cornelius had accumulated to men in Boston, men who did not give second chances. He described the way Cornelius had asked him to sign the North Acreage as collateral. He described the way Cornelius had come back with a different lawyer, in a different contract, in a different signature line. He described the day Cornelius Ashcroft had brought 2 men to this cabin, men who worked for him, men whose names he did not know, but whose faces he had memorized. He described how one of those men had watched from the doorway. A young man, Cornelius Ashcroft's own teenage son, home from boarding school on his October break. The recording continued. "I want to name the boy, because the boy is a witness. The boy is 15 years old. His name is Winston Ashcroft. He is being brought here to see what his father will do. He is being brought here to be broken into silence. He is being brought here to become the next link in the chain. If anyone hears this recording, please, please, if Winston Ashcroft ever tells the truth, do not blame him for waiting. Do not blame him for being afraid. He is 15 years old today, and what he sees today will define him for the rest of his life. May God have mercy on my old friend Cornelius, and on his son, and on any child of that boy who comes after." The recording ended. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Then Delaney whispered, "Winston Ashcroft." Rowan Fitch was already typing on his phone. He looked up. "Winston Ashcroft died in 2019, but he had a son. His son is the current CEO of Ashcroft Ridge Development. Delaney's hand went to her mouth. His name is Weston Ashcroft. The room went still because a horrible and beautiful truth had just walked into it. The current CEO was the grandson of the boy in the doorway, was the grandson of the child who had watched, was the grandson of a witness, not a murderer, a witness. Delaney closed her eyes because the story she had been living for 3 days was suddenly much older than 3 days. And the man she was about to face might not know at all what his family had done. Rowan Fitch drove her to Ashcroft Ridge Development the next morning because they had asked for a meeting, because Vaughn Merritt had called every hour on the hour for 2 days, because they knew she had the deeds, because they knew she had gone to the county records, because they knew she had gone to the bakery and the church, because they did not know about the recording. Delaney did not go alone. She had Rowan Fitch beside her. She had a lawyer from Boston named Adrienne Cole, small, silver-haired, terrifying in the way small, silver-haired lawyers get to be after 40 years of terrifying people. She had a copy of every deed, every page of the transfer contract, and a small digital player, loaded with a 22-minute file. Silas stayed with Maggie. Maggie had baked him a whole tray of sugar cookies, just for him. She had said before Delaney left, "Go get your grandpa his justice honey, and come home to us. Come home to us." Delaney had cried. She had not been able to help it. Now she stood in front of the Ashcroft Ridge Development headquarters. 6 stories of glass, steel, money, built on her great-grandfather's mountain. She walked in, head up, Silas's blue backpack over her shoulder, because she was not going to leave it anywhere, ever. She was going to give that backpack to Silas when he was 30 years old and tell him what it had carried. What he had carried when he was 5. The receptionist looked up. "Delaney Whitcomb," Delaney said, "for Mr. Ashcroft." The receptionist did not smile. She just nodded once. She picked up the phone. She murmured something into it. Then she stood. "He'll see you now." The conference room was on the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, every direction. Every direction was the mountain, because there was nothing else here except the mountain. The whole point of this building was to sell the mountain, to sell her mountain. Weston Ashcroft was already at the head of the conference table. I was 45 years old, tall, slim, salt and pepper hair, blue suit, no tie. He had the kind of face that had been shaped by 100 prep schools and 1,000 handshakes. And behind his eyes was a tiredness that surprised her. He stood when she walked in. He did not smile. He said quietly, "Miss Whitcomb, thank you for coming. I didn't do it for you, Darren. I know." Vaughn Merritt was there too, sitting to Weston's right. His smile was thinner now. His briefcase was already open. Adrienne Cole took the seat opposite Weston. Rowan Fitch took the seat beside her. Delaney sat between them. Vaughn Merritt cleared his throat. He began, "Miss Whitcomb, we have prepared a very generous offer. In light of the paperwork ambiguities discovered in our recent title review, Ashcroft Ridge is prepared to offer you the following." He slid a folder across the table. Delaney did not touch it. She did not even look at it. She looked at Weston Ashcroft. She said, "Mr. Ashcroft, I would like to play you something first." He blinked. "What?" "An audio recording." Vaughn Merritt started to speak. Weston Ashcroft raised one hand. Vaughn Merritt closed his mouth. Weston looked at Delaney. "What kind of recording?" She placed the small digital player on the table. She said, "A recording made by my great-grandfather, Elias Whitcomb, 2 days before he was killed, in October of 1948. He describes the events leading up to his death. He names the men involved, and he names," she paused. She looked Weston Ashcroft in the eye. "He names your grandfather, Winston, who was 15 years old on the day of the killing, and who was standing in the doorway." The color left Weston Ashcroft's face. Just left. Vaughn Merritt made a sound. "This is preposterous." Weston Ashcroft turned to him very slowly. "Vaughn." "Sir, I strongly advise." "Vaughn, get out." "Sir, get out." Vaughn Merritt sat frozen for one very long second. Then he stood. He gathered his folder. He walked out of the conference room without looking at anyone. The door closed behind him. Weston Ashcroft looked at Delaney. His voice was almost a whisper. "Play it." She pressed the button. Delaney watched Weston Ashcroft's face for 22 minutes. She watched a man she was prepared to hate become a man she could not. She watched him hear his grandfather's name. She watched him hear the words 15 years old. She watched his mouth press flat when Elias Whitcomb said he is being brought here to become the next link in the chain. She watched him close his eyes when Elias said, "May God have mercy on the son." She watched a single tear roll down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. When the recording ended, Weston Ashcroft sat very still. Then he said without opening his eyes, "My grandfather told me a story once." Delaney waited. "When I was 10, he was already sick. He had one lung left. He was living in the house on the ridge, the old house. He would sit on the porch in the evenings. He would look at the mountain." Weston Ashcroft opened his eyes. Delaney saw in them a grief that was 78 years old. "He told me," he said, "Weston, there are things a man sees when he is a boy, and they build inside him, like a stone, and they get bigger, and you cannot say them, because the men who did them are still alive, and they are your father, and your uncle, and your teacher, and your priest, and to say what you saw would be to burn your whole world down." He looked out the window, at the mountain. He said, "Weston, there will come a day, someone will come, and they will ask you a question, and when they do, you have to answer it. Do you hear me? You have to answer it, even if the answer burns everything down." He was crying now, openly. He did not care. He looked back at Delaney. "My grandfather told me that story when I was 10 years old. I did not understand it. Not for 35 years. Not until today. Not until this moment. Not until you walked into this room." Delaney could not speak. Weston Ashcroft leaned forward. "Miss Whitcomb, what do you want?" She thought about it a long time because it was the most important question anyone had ever asked her. Then she said, "I want the mountain back. It is yours. I want the truth in the newspaper. I will help you. I want your grandfather's name off the statue in the town square. Consider it done. And I want," her voice caught, "I want to build something on that mountain. Something that would make my great-grandfather proud." Weston Ashcroft nodded very slowly. "Whatever it is," he said, "Ashcroft Ridge will pay for it." She looked at him a long time. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "My family took something from your family. 78 years ago, my grandfather kept it. My father grew rich on it. I built this company on it, and I did not know. I swear to you on every God I have ever prayed to, I did not know." He shook his head. "But I know now, and I cannot spend the rest of my life pretending I don't." He stood up. He walked around the conference table. He stopped in front of Delaney, and he did something she did not expect. He knelt. He knelt. A 45-year-old man in a $2,000 suit knelt in front of a 25-year-old single mother in a thrift store coat. He said, "On behalf of my family, on behalf of every year we did not know, on behalf of the boy who stood in that doorway and could not speak, I am so deeply sorry." Delaney could not stop the tears. She could not stop them. She reached out and she put her hand on his shoulder. She said one word, "Rise." He rose. And in a top-floor conference room and with the whole mountain outside the windows, two families that had been at war for 78 years made peace. Vaughn Merritt called her that evening. She was back at Maggie's. Silas was asleep on the couch. Rowan Fitch was on his laptop at the kitchen table. Maggie was making tea. The phone rang. Delaney looked at the screen. Vaughn Merritt. She almost did not answer. But she did, because she had learned this week that some doors have to be closed by the person who was standing behind them. She put the phone to her ear. She said nothing. Vaughn Merritt spoke first. His voice was different now. Broken. Small. The voice of a man who had lost the shape of his own life in a single afternoon. "Miss Whitcomb." She waited. "I want to apologize." She waited. "I have been an attorney for 11 years. I made a lot of bad decisions. I made them for money. I made them because I thought I was smarter than the consequences. I want you to know." His voice cracked. "I want you to know I never would have hurt your son. I want you to know that." Delaney's hand tightened on the phone. She thought about every threat he had ever made her. Every implication, every soft warning about accidents and fires and small children. She thought about how her heart had stopped when he said, "You have a beautiful little boy." She thought about what she wanted to say to him. She thought about all the words. Then she said none of them. She said calmly, "I hope you never say those words to another mother again." Then she hung up. She set the phone down on the counter. She did not cry. Maggie handed her a mug of tea. Delaney looked at her. "He's going to prison, isn't he?" "Yes, honey." "Good." She took a sip of the tea, and that was the last time Vaughn Merritt ever spoke to her. The story broke in the Boston Globe 3 weeks later. The headline was simple: Vermont family recovers ancestral land after 78-year cover-up. Development company CEO cooperates. The article named Vaughn Merritt, who was arrested 2 days after publication on charges of state-level bribery, conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and a long list of other charges tied to 20 years of paying off town officials in Pine Hollow. Not for what happened in 1948. Weston Ashcroft's grandfather Winston was long dead. Cornelius Ashcroft was long dead. There was nobody left to prosecute for the crime itself. But there were plenty of people to prosecute for the cover-up. 20 years of bribed sheriffs, bribed county clerks, bribed mayors, bribed judges, bribed inspectors, all to keep the paperwork buried, all to keep Ashcroft Ridge Development sitting on land it did not fully own. The Vermont Attorney General's office opened an investigation. 15 town officials resigned. Vaughn Merritt was disbarred. The statue in the town square came down on a Tuesday morning in November. Nobody protested because everybody had known, because everybody had been waiting. Delaney did not take the money, not for herself. Weston Ashcroft's lawyers had drawn up a settlement offer that would have made her wealthy for 3 generations. She sat with Adrienne Cole and she read every line. Then she folded it up and she asked for something different. She asked that the 412 acres be placed into a permanent land trust, managed by the Vermont Land Trust, protected forever, no development, ever, no hotels, ever, no condominiums, ever, just the mountain, just the trees, just the way her great-grandfather had wanted it. She asked that the cabin itself be preserved as a historic site, with a small plaque out front, bearing the name Elias John Whitcomb, and she asked for one more thing. The old Ashcroft Ridge headquarters, the 6-story glass building in the valley. She asked that it be converted into a shelter, a real shelter, for single mothers, for women fleeing bad marriages, for women who had lost their apartments, for women with children and $42 in their pockets and no plan B. She asked that it be free, forever. She asked that it be named the Elias Whitcomb Memorial Shelter. Weston Ashcroft signed every paper. He did not hesitate, not once. The shelter opened the following June. Delaney cut the ribbon. Silas held her hand. He was 6 now. He had grown 2 inches. He had gained 7 pounds. He had started kindergarten in Pine Hollow. He had a best friend named Toby. He had a favorite teacher named Mrs. Delacroix. He rode his bicycle to school on days when it did not snow. He was in every way she had prayed for him to be a boy who had never lived in a shelter. I was in every way that mattered a boy who had chosen not to forget. Because on the first night, the shelter opened. He carried Mr. Buttons inside, and he handed the small brown teddy bear to a little girl on a cot in the family room, a little girl whose mother was crying quietly in the corner, whose mother had 2 black eyes, whose mother had 1 plastic bag of clothes. Silas placed Mr. Buttons on the little girl's lap. He said, "He helped me when I lived here. He'll help you too." The little girl clutched Mr. Buttons. She did not let go. Delaney watched from the doorway. She wept. Not sad tears, not this time. The Elias Whitcomb Memorial Shelter served 47 families in its first year. It hired Doreen from the shelter Delaney had left as director. Doreen cried when Delaney offered her the job. It hired Ruth from the same shelter. Ruth was 70 years old. She ran the chapel. She sat with women who were afraid. She loaned them Bibles that they were never expected to return. It hired Nora, who had been the county records clerk, who had known the truth for 31 years and had prayed every day for someone to walk in and ask about a Whitcomb. Maggie O'Brien baked bread for the shelter every morning. Free, every day. Ellis Thorne performed weddings, baptisms, funerals. He said he had never had a busier decade. And on the mountain, on the 412 acres now held in perpetual trust with the Vermont Land Trust, Delaney restored the cabin, board by board, nail by nail. She kept the calendar on the wall at October 1948. She kept the boots by the door. She kept the coat on the hook. She kept the handkerchief on the table. But she added one thing, a photograph, a new one. Herself and Silas, standing in the doorway of the cabin, sunlight on their faces, her son leaning against her hip, both of them smiling in a way that had taken a whole year to earn. She hung it on the wall, beside the black and white photograph of Elias Whitcomb, beside the woman with her jaw, beside the small square of Margaret Rose. 4 generations, on one wall, in one cabin, that had been sealed for 78 years. Because a girl was coming, because a girl had come, because a girl had brought her son. The Sunday before the shelter's first anniversary, Delaney went to church in Pine Hollow, the little white church, with the steeple and the flagstone under the altar, and the pastor, who was 83 now and slower on the walk down the aisle but sharper than he had ever been. Delaney sat in the third pew, on the left. Silas sat beside her, his hair combed, his hands folded in his lap. He was 6 years and 4 months old, and he still could not stop swinging his feet during the sermon. Maggie sat on Delaney's other side. Ruth had come up from the shelter. She sat behind them. Halfway through the service, the door at the back of the church opened. A man walked in, late, alone. Delaney turned her head, just enough to see. Weston Ashcroft. He slipped into the back pew. He bowed his head. He did not look up. She turned back to the front, and she felt something in her chest, something she had not expected to feel. Peace, not forgiveness, not exactly, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something like a door. Something like a door that had been sealed and had opened and was letting the light in. After the service, Delaney stood in the vestibule with Silas beside her, shaking hands, accepting hugs, talking to Pastor Thorne about the potluck the next weekend. Weston Ashcroft walked past her. He did not say a word. He just paused. He looked down, and he placed his hand, very gently, on Silas's small shoulder. Silas looked up at him. Weston Ashcroft smiled at the little boy. Sadly, tenderly, the way a man smiles at the last chapter of a book his family has been writing for 100 years. Then he walked out into the sunshine. Delaney watched him go. She did not call him back. She did not need to, because he would come back next Sunday, and the Sunday after, and the Sunday after, because a man who has knelt before you in a top-floor conference room has already come home. He is just walking the last mile. That evening, Delaney and Silas drove back up the mountain in Delaney's small used pickup truck, bought last month, paid for with the first check the shelter had ever earned. The trees were red and gold. The Vermont October was doing what Vermont October does. Silas rolled his window down. He put his face into the wind. He laughed. Delaney glanced at him, and her heart did the thing it had learned to do this year. That small, quiet ache, that small, quiet joy. They pulled up to the cabin. The cabin now had a real path, a small sign, a little bench for hikers to rest on, a guest book by the door where visitors could leave a note if they wanted. They went inside. Delaney lit the little iron stove. Silas climbed into the rocking chair with a picture book, and Delaney went to the shelf where the wire recording used to be, the one that had been under the altar for 78 years, the one that had been converted to a digital file that lived on servers in Boston. The original wire and its playback spool were gone. The Vermont Historical Society had them, in a climate-controlled archive, where they belonged, in their place, on the shelf. Delaney had placed something else, a framed handkerchief, white, faded, embroidered in one corner in careful looping thread. Margaret Rose. She stared at it for a long time. She thought about her mother. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the woman with her jaw in the old photograph. She thought about Elias Whitcomb sitting at this table. In October of 1948, folding a small piece of cloth, setting it down, trusting that someday, somehow, somebody in his line would come to find it. She whispered, just to herself, just to the cabin, just to the mountain. I brought her home, Grandpa. I brought them all home. The stove crackled. Silas turned a page of his book. Somewhere outside, on the mountain that was safe now, forever, a single bird called in the deepening evening. And the cabin that had been sealed for 78 years, that had been waiting, just waiting, for the right person to come and open its door, was at last a home again. Not a museum, not a monument, not a wound, a home for a mother, for her son, for the mountain around them, for every woman who would come down from that mountain in the years ahead, every woman who would sleep on a shelter cot in the town below and think, I have nothing, I have nowhere. Every woman who would one day walk into the Elias Whitcomb Memorial Shelter and be handed a warm meal, and a bed, and a Bible, and a small brown teddy bear if she had a child, and the quiet, gentle whisper of a woman named Doreen or Nora or Ruth, who would say to her the words that Ruth had once said in a shelter chapel to a scared young woman with $42 in her pocket. You are not a woman who were thrown away. You are a woman who was sent for. Delaney sat down beside her son. She pulled him onto her lap. She kissed the top of his hair. And in the last golden hour of a Vermont Sunday, in a cabin that had been sealed for 78 years, and a mountain that had been stolen for 78 years, and a family that had been fractured for 78 years, Delaney Whitcomb closed her eyes and whispered the only prayer she had left. Thank you. Thank you for sending me. Thank you for letting me come. The fire crackled, the mountain held them, and somewhere 78 years away, a man in a wool coat set down his pen, closed his journal, folded a small square of white cloth on a wooden table, and whispered back across all the years between them, I knew you would. I knew you would come. Welcome home.